Hey everyone. So I came across one of those videos where someone was talking about how if there's no God, and there's nothing that can assure us our rights, and so therefore rights are arbitrary and we aren't guaranteed them, and the world would be a sad place. The question to me is, does God protect those rights? In my opinion, no. I mean, they say God gave them rights, but God didn't prevent slavery. He didn't stop the Holocaust. When today, each day, 1,000 people are murdered around the world, He doesn't intervene. And that's the most sacred right of all, the right to life. But this video isn't about the problem of evil. It's not about the problem of suffering. I'm merely stating a fact. God does not enforce rights on earth, whatever the reason. So that's why we rely on political systems. And as we know, totalitarian systems have a disregard for human life. That's why we move to democracy. And that protects our rights. Finally, our rights are safe. Are they though? All it takes is 51%, a tiny, tiny majority, to hate us. And we can become persecuted. We can become vilified. We can become hunted, perhaps even killed overnight, like was the case in Nazi Germany, which started out as a democracy, as we know. So that's where the Constitution comes in, and the Bill of Rights, if you have one. We don't have one in Australia, but many countries do. And of course there's the independent judiciary, and there are our elected representatives who, unlike, us normal stupid people that can't think for ourselves, they're level-headed. So they don't give in to all of those crazy emotions, and they wouldn't hurt us, right? So now we're safe. Or are we? No, we're still not safe. Those representatives, well, if they're representing a mob, then they'll act as the mob wishes them to. And perhaps they have their own villainous ideas. Again, like in Nazi Germany. They're not going to prevent bad things from happening to us if we're unlucky. They will, of course, line their pockets at the same time. That is what we can rely on. What about the independent judiciary? Well, judges are not elected usually, or at least not elected by popular vote. So you do frequently get people that might actually have moral fiber that will stop them from acting in ways that violate our rights, if they believe in those rights. But in the end, if judges aren't elected, then they're appointed. And in time, you can appoint the right judges, because they'll retire. Or they can, of course, be retired. That's where our sacred documents come in. And I'm not talking about the Bible. I'm talking about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. They're what protect us. No, they don't. I mean, you can always change them. You might need a supermajority or a referendum, but it can be done. It's very difficult, of course. I mean, a referendum, usually it's not 51%. It takes a much higher proportion, like 75% of something. But even if it's too hard to do by referendum, it's still just a piece of paper. It's not a rock wall against injustice. It's a paper tiger in the face of hatred. The veneer of civilization is very thin indeed. It can be torn apart by a moment of shared hatred, just an instant of insanity, and then laws cannot protect us. Our representatives cannot protect us. And God, whatever the reason, and some of us think it's because He's not there, He won't. Looks pretty bleak at this point. Looks like we're all screwed. But there's hope. There's one body that can protect us. There's one institution that cannot be abandoned or abolished. And this one law that cannot be overturned. It's the body and the institution of humanity. It's the law of humanism, and it's the simple elegance of human empathy. Now, of course, it can be tricked, it can be distorted, and by these means it can be overcome. It can be, at least as long as we remain uneducated. As long as we don't understand rational thought, and as long as we don't understand ethics. But, in the end, it's the only true bulwark against injustice. It's the only barrier to intolerance. And it's the only signpost to progress that we have. It's each other. Yes, our intelligence brought us very far as a species, but it couldn't have done so without the other element that was at least as important. That's our love for one another. That's how we defeated the lions of the savannah, and that's how we came through the ice ages. And that's how we built civilization, one brick at a time. With it, we can build a better future for us all. A future in which we don't have to be afraid anymore, a future in which we don't have to suffer as much, in which we can be secure, in which we don't always have to look to others with suspicion. That is the future if we embrace our own humanity. If we reject it, like a lot of people seem to want it today, instead going with cold mathematical formulas, with trying to build grand systems that, through some supposed laws, keep everything in check, we're crippling ourselves. We become slighted beings. We become ugly things, even uglier than... we become ugly things. We hide ourselves away at our TVs. We're ashamed of ourselves because we understand that we're failing. We're failing ourselves and we're failing our fellow humans. And we don't want to acknowledge all the suffering in the world that we're doing such a good job ignoring every day. And that's why we need education. Education leads to enlightenment, and education leads to responsibility. As we educate ourselves, we're no longer able to ignore that which is so obvious. We're no longer able to ignore the suffering of our fellow humans. We're no longer able to suppress our human empathy for one another. And then we're no longer able to suppress our human empathy for one another once we understand that our neighbor is just like us. Yes, perhaps different experiences, perhaps a different disposition given to them at birth. But aside from those little things, they're the same. They want to be happy. And if we get this education, if we educate ourselves and others, if we educate ourselves and others, we can achieve true democracy without the middlemen, without the power brokers and the elites. And then once we have that, we can create a fair and just economy that provides for people's needs. An economy that cares about people, not about profits, not about some abstract numbers. We'll stop being statistics. We can love to share what we are with other people, because we won't have to be ashamed anymore. And then we can love to share what we have with other people, because we can feel safe. We can be safe in the knowledge that when we're in need, we don't need to run to the bank and get out our little savings and hope they last us through the day. We can fall back on all of those other people that are there to catch us. I mean, we've made such tremendous progress over the last 100 years. We've it's not, the project isn't finished yet, but we're defeating racism, we're defeating sexism, we're defeating homophobia, we're beating every kind of bigotry. But we can't rely on any system, on any ideology, on any deity to protect that progress. When push comes to shove, they'll all let us down. They don't have any real power, they're just ideas. The only thing we can rely on is our fellow human beings. They're the only ones that can protect our rights and our freedoms. They're the only ones we can rely on today, tomorrow, forever. There will never be anything else we can rely on to keep ourselves free and safe. And so united we stand. If we don't, if we drift further apart, then of the great things that we've achieved, we're going to lose a lot of that progress. Maybe all of it. Maybe it'll be a case of 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, and we'll just be the ones that are there for the 2 steps back, which is not the future that I want for myself, or anyone would want for their children. Alright, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys all later. Have a very good evening.